Night has fallen. The wind is still. The stones are silent. There is no hurry tonight. Nothing you need to remember. All you need to do is listen. This is a story of dreams carried from distant ages, of voices without names, and of quiet wisdom whispered into the night. You don't need to stay awake. If sleep finds you, that is exactly how it should be. Slow your breath. The earth holds you. The night keeps watch. Welcome to Dreamy On. The story begins. The first person to hear the stones singing was a child who couldn't sleep. Her name was Sigrid, and she was 7 winters old. On that particular night, restlessness had pulled her from her bed in the longhouse, and she'd wandered outside while the rest of the village lay dreaming. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of pine and distant sea salt. Above her, stars scattered across the sky like seeds thrown by an invisible hand. That's when she heard it, a low hum, barely there, like the sound of wind moving through a narrow canyon. Sigrid turned her head, tried to locate the source. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She walked slowly through the settlement, past the silent houses and the embers of cooking fires, following the vibration that she felt as much as heard. It led her to the edge of the village, where 3 massive runestones stood in a triangle, each taller than 2 men and covered in ancient carvings that seemed to shift in the starlight. The humming was coming from the stones themselves. She approached carefully, the way one might approach a sleeping wolf, with respect and a touch of fear. As she drew closer, the sound grew clearer, separating into distinct tones that wove together like voices in harmony. Sigrid reached out her small hand and placed it against the nearest stone. The surface was warm, impossibly warm for rock in the night air, and she could feel the vibration traveling up her arm and into her chest, settling somewhere near her heart. Without understanding why, she felt her eyes growing heavy. The humming became a lullaby, not in words she knew, but in a language deeper than words. She sank down at the base of the stone, her back against its curved surface, and let the sound carry her towards sleep. When her father found her at dawn, she was smiling in her sleep, and she wouldn't wake for 3 full hours. Imagine, if you had been there that morning, watching the confusion ripple through the village as they gathered around the sleeping child. Her father, Hakon, was a blacksmith with hands scarred from years of working hot iron. He was not a man prone to fear, but as he knelt beside his daughter and saw the peaceful expression on her face, something in him went cold. He'd seen death enough times to recognize its signature, and this looked too close to it for comfort. "Should we move her?" someone asked. "No," came a voice from the back of the gathered crowd. "Leave her be." The speaker was Eirik, the village's skald, their keeper of songs and stories, their living memory. He was old now, his beard gone completely white, his back bent from years of sitting by fires and recounting the deeds of ancestors. But his eyes were sharp, and they fixed on the runestones with an expression that mingled recognition with something that might have been dread. "You know what this is?" Hakon said. It wasn't a question. Eirik nodded slowly. He moved through the crowd, his staff clicking against the hard ground with each step, until he stood before the stones. He reached out, just as Sigrid had, and placed his palm against the nearest one. The humming was silent now in the daylight, but Eirik's hand trembled slightly as he touched the ancient surface. "These stones," he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a storyteller, were raised by our ancestors 7 generations ago, but they're far older than that. They were here long before our people came to this valley, carved by hands we can only guess at, marked with symbols that predate even the earliest runes we know. The villagers listened, transfixed. Even those who had heard Eirik's tales 100 times felt the weight of his words differently now. With Sigrid sleeping peacefully at the stone's base and the morning light casting long shadows across the carved surface. There is a story, Eirik continued, that I was told only once by my own teacher when I was barely older than Sigrid is now. He made me swear never to speak of it unless the stones themselves gave permission. I believe they have given that permission now. He paused, gathering his thoughts, or perhaps gathering his courage. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something just above a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. These stones contain dreams. Not ordinary dreams, but the dreams of warriors who died far from home, whose spirits could not find their way to their people, whose final thoughts went unheard. In the old days, before our ancestors settled this valley, there was a practice among certain tribes. When a warrior died in foreign lands, far from anyone who knew his name, a seer would find the place where he fell and would harvest the dream. Harvest, someone echoed. The last dream, Eirik clarified. The final vision that passes through a dying mind. The seers believed these dreams contained all the wisdom a person had accumulated in life, distilled into pure understanding. They would capture these dreams and carry them to sacred stones like these, where they could be preserved for future generations. The crowd murmured, a mixture of awe and unease rippling through them. Hakon looked down at his daughter, still sleeping, still smiling. Why now, he asked. Why has she heard them when no one else has? But actually, there was something Eirik hadn't yet revealed. Something that explained not only why Sigrid had heard the stones, but why the village itself had been chosen for this burden. The old skald's expression shifted, a shadow passing over his weathered features. The stones do not sing randomly, he said quietly. They sing when they have something urgent to share, when the trapped dreams within them sense that their wisdom is needed by the living. He turned to face the assembled villagers fully now, his back to the stones, and his next words came with the weight of prophecy. Sigrid heard them because her spirit is still open in ways that we, as adults, have forgotten. Children stand closer to the threshold between worlds. They haven't yet learned to close the doors that age and practicality demand we shut. As if to punctuate his words, Sigrid stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the morning light. She looked up at her father and smiled, that same peaceful smile she'd worn in sleep, as though she'd just woken from the most restful night of her young life. "Papa," she said softly, "I had the most wonderful dream." Hakon gathered her into his arms, relief flooding through him. "Tell me," and she did. As the village listened in growing wonder, 7-year-old Sigrid described a dream that could not possibly have come from her own imagination. She spoke of a battlefield she'd never seen, in a land she'd never visited, under skies she'd never studied. She described a warrior named Thorvald, who had sailed from these very shores 20 years before Sigrid was born, seeking glory in distant lands. He was so tired, Sigrid said, her small voice carrying a gravity that didn't match her years. He'd been fighting for so long, and he just wanted to go home. But he couldn't. He was too far away, and he knew he was dying. So he closed his eyes and thought about the valley where he grew up, about the way the light looked on the mountains in summer, about his mother's hands when she braided his hair before his first voyage, about the smell of bread baking in his father's house. Tears had begun to stream down the faces of some of the older villagers. One woman in particular, Astrid, who had to be nearly 70 winters herself, let out a soft sob. "Thorvald was my brother," she whispered. "He left when I was just a girl. We never knew what became of him." Sigrid turned her large eyes to the old woman. "He thought of you. At the very end, when everything else faded, he remembered his sister. He wanted you to know that he loved you, and that he was sorry he never came home." The silence that followed was profound. It was broken only by Astrid's quiet weeping and the distant call of a raven somewhere in the trees beyond the settlement. Eirik cleared his throat gently. "The stones hold many such dreams," he said. "If what the old stories tell us is true, they will continue to sing night after night, releasing one dream at a time to those who are ready to receive them. Each dream is a gift, a lesson, a message, a piece of wisdom meant to guide us toward peace and understanding." Over the following nights, the pattern Eirik described came to pass. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, the stones would begin their humming. It was subtle at first, so quiet that only those who listened carefully could hear it. But as the night grew darker, the sound would strengthen, becoming a presence that filled the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Different people heard the stones sing on different nights. Sometimes it was another child. Sometimes it was an adult who happened to be walking past at the right moment, their mind open and receptive in ways it hadn't been during the day's work and worry. And each person who heard the stones and allowed themselves to sink into their song would experience a dream that wasn't their own, a borrowed memory, a glimpse into a life lived long ago and far away. There was Bjorn, the fisherman, who dreamed of a merchant sailor named Odd who had died during a storm off the coast of a land where the sun barely set in summer. Odd had spent his final moments thinking not of treasure or glory, but of the simple pleasure of sitting by a fire with friends, sharing stories and laughter. When Bjorn woke, he found himself less concerned with the size of his catch and more interested in the company of his fellow fishermen. There was Ingrid, the weaver, who dreamed of a warrior woman named Helga who had fallen in battle defending a settlement she'd been hired to protect. Helga's last thoughts had been about the tapestry her mother had woven when Helga was a child, a tapestry depicting the 4 seasons in the valley where she'd grown up. When Ingrid woke, she began working on a similar tapestry, finding in the process a piece she hadn't known she'd been missing. Each dream brought with it a lesson, though not always an obvious one. The lessons were subtle, woven into the memories and emotions of the dying warriors. They were lessons about what mattered at the end of a life, about love and home, about regret and acceptance, about the small moments that take on enormous significance when viewed from the edge of eternity. The village began to change. It was gradual, like the way seasons shift so slowly that you don't notice until one day you realize the leaves have turned or the first snow has fallen. Arguments that might have festered for weeks were resolved more quickly. People found themselves more patient with each other, more willing to listen, more ready to forgive. The work didn't become easier, and life didn't become simple. But there was a quality to the days that felt different, softer somehow, as though the village itself had learned to breathe more deeply. But as the weeks passed and more dreams were released, the stone's humming began to change. It grew quieter, more infrequent. Some nights, there was no sound at all. Eirik noticed this first, of course. He had taken to spending his evenings near the stones, observing them, listening for their song. On a night when the humming failed to arrive, he remained there until dawn, his hand resting on the central stone, his mind reaching out toward whatever consciousness resided within. When the sun rose, he gathered the village once more. "The dreams are finite," he told them. His voice carried sadness, but also acceptance. "We've known this from the beginning, though perhaps we didn't want to admit it. Each dream released is one less dream contained. The stones are emptying themselves, sharing their wisdom, and when they're done, they'll fall silent forever." A young man named Leaf, who had recently become a father, spoke up. "How many dreams are left?" Eirik shook his head. "I cannot know for certain, but I would guess not many. Perhaps weeks, perhaps only days." The village received this news with mixed emotions. There was grief, certainly. The stones had become a source of comfort, a nightly reminder that death was not simply an ending, but a transformation, a passage that could still offer gifts to the living. But there was also gratitude, and a sense that they had been privileged to experience something rare and sacred. That night, the stones sang again. The humming was softer than before, more fragile, like the voice of someone very old speaking from the edge of sleep. Only a few people heard it, and those who did felt compelled to gather near the stones, drawn by an instinct they couldn't name. Sigrid was among them. She had spent many nights by the stones since that first encounter, and she had become attuned to their rhythms in ways even Eirik couldn't fully explain. She sat at the base of the center stone, her small form barely visible in the darkness, and waited. The dream that came that night was different from the others. It was not the dream of a single warrior, but rather a collective vision, a weaving together of multiple minds, multiple perspectives, multiple last moments stretched across time and geography. It was overwhelming in its complexity, too vast for any one mind to fully comprehend, but those who experienced it came away with a singular impression: peace. Pure, undiluted peace. Not the peace of having resolved all conflicts or answered all questions, but the peace of accepting that some things would remain unresolved and unanswered. The peace of letting go. The peace of trusting that the world would continue without them, that the people they loved would be okay, that the stories they'd lived would be remembered in ways both large and small. When the dream ended and those gathered by the stones opened their eyes, they found tears on their cheeks and smiles on their lips. They sat together in silence for a long while, each processing what they'd experienced, each finding their own meaning in the vast tapestry of emotions and images they'd been shown. Finally, Eirik spoke. His voice was hoarse with emotion. "I believe that was the last dream," he said. "The stones have given us everything they have to give." And he was right. From that night forward, the stones never hummed again. They stood silent and still, their carvings catching the light at different times of day, their surfaces cool and inert to any hand that touched them. They had become simply what they appeared to be: ancient stones, markers of a time long past. monuments to something that had been. But the dreams themselves lived on. They lived on in the stories the villagers told each other, in the way they treated one another, in the priorities they chose for their lives. They lived on in Sigrid, who grew up to become a skald herself, carrying forward the wisdom she'd absorbed from the stones and adding to it her own observations and insights. They lived on in the children who were born after the stones fell silent, children who would never hear the humming, but who would grow up in a village shaped by its influence. Years later, when Sigrid was an old woman herself, she would sit by fires on winter nights and tell the story of the dreaming stones. She would describe the humming, the warmth of the rock, the feeling of receiving a dream that belonged to someone else. And she would end the story the same way every time, with words that Eirik had spoken to her on the morning after that final collective dream. The stones taught us something essential, she would say, her voice carrying the same cadence her teachers had carried decades before. They taught us that wisdom is not held only by the living, that those who came before us have gifts to share if we're willing to listen, and that the most profound truths often come to us not through grand proclamations, but through quiet moments of connection with something larger than ourselves. Then she would pause, looking at the faces gathered around her, young faces mostly belonging to people who had never seen the stones sing. And she would add, "But the stones also taught us that all things have their season, that gifts, no matter how precious, are meant to be given and received, not hoarded. That wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied, and that the greatest honor we can give to those who came before is not to preserve their gifts untouched, but to let them transform us and then to pass that transformation forward." On clear nights, when the stars blazed overhead and the air carried the scent of pine and distant sea, she would sometimes walk to where the stones stood. They were silent now, had been silent for longer than most people in the village had been alive. But Sigrid would place her hand on the central stone anyway, feeling its cool surface, remembering the warmth it had once held. And sometimes, just sometimes in the space between heartbeats, in the quiet moment before sleep, she thought she could still hear it. That low, gentle humming like wind through a canyon, like voices in harmony, like the sound of every dream that had ever been dreamed finding its way home. The stones had done their work. They had released their burden, shared their wisdom, and fallen silent. And in doing so, they had taught the village the most important lesson of all, that peace comes not from holding on, but from letting go. Not from preserving what was, but from honoring it and then allowing it to become something new. As Sigrid would walk back to her home on those nights, the stars watching from above, she would carry with her the memory of that first humming, that first dream, that first moment of understanding that the past and present and future were not separate things, but parts of a continuous flow. And she would smile, knowing that somewhere, in some way she couldn't quite articulate, the dreams were still being dreamed, still being shared, still finding their way to those who needed them most. The village would sleep peacefully that night, as it did every night, held in the gentle embrace of all the wisdom that had come before. The stones stood silent in the darkness, monuments to a gift given freely and completely. And if you listen carefully, truly carefully, with the kind of attention that children possess before the world teaches them to stop paying attention to impossible things, you might just hear beneath the sound of wind and the rustle of leaves and the distant call of night birds, a faint humming, barely there, like the echo of a song that has ended, but whose melody lingers on forever and always, in the hearts of those who were lucky enough to hear it. But let us return to the beginning, to those first nights when the stones sang with full voice, when their burden was still heavy and their gift still abundant. Let us walk through the village as it was then, and meet the others whose lives were touched by the dreaming stones. There was Magnus, for instance. Magnus the shipbuilder, a man of 40 winters with hands that knew with the way a harper knows strings. He lived alone in a workshop that smelled of pine resin and fresh shavings, and he had not slept well in years. His wife had died in childbirth 7 winters past, taking their infant son with her, and since then, Magnus had filled his nights with work rather than rest. He would carve and plane and fit until exhaustion took him, and even then, his sleep was fitful, broken by dreams that brought no comfort. On the 5th night after Sigrid first heard the stones, Magnus was working late, as usual. His hands moved across the curved rib of a new boat, feeling for imperfections, making adjustments so subtle that no one but another master craftsman would ever notice them. Outside his workshop, the night had grown deep and quiet, and that's when he heard it, the humming of the stones drifting through his open door like smoke from a distant fire. He set down his tools slowly, listening. The sound was unlike anything he'd heard before, and yet somehow familiar, as though it had always been there just beneath the threshold of his hearing, waiting for him to stop and notice. Without quite deciding to do so, Magnus found himself walking toward the sound, out of his workshop, through the sleeping village, to where the stones stood in their ancient triangle. The humming grew stronger as he approached, wrapping around him like a physical presence. He could feel it in his bones, in the hollow place behind his ribs where his heart had once beat more freely. When he reached the stones, he didn't hesitate. He simply sat down, his back against the central stone, and closed his eyes. The dream that came to him was the dream of a man named Arn, who had died in a forest fire while trying to save a village that wasn't even his own. Arn had been traveling through foreign lands when he'd seen the smoke, heard the screams, and without thinking, without even knowing the language these people spoke, he had run toward the danger instead of away from it. He had pulled 3 children from a burning house before the roof collapsed on him. His last thoughts had not been of pain or fear, but of satisfaction. He had saved them. In that moment, nothing else mattered. When Magnus woke, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. He sat there for a long moment, tears streaming down his weathered face, and something inside him that had been clenched tight for 7 years finally relaxed. He understood something he hadn't understood before, that his wife and son's deaths had not been meaningless, that their short time in the world had mattered, that the love he'd felt for them and they for him was not diminished by their absence, but somehow made more precious by it. He went back to his workshop as dawn broke fully, but he didn't pick up his tools immediately. Instead, he opened all the windows, letting in the morning light and the sound of birds beginning their day. He would still work on his boats, still craft them with the same meticulous care. But he would also remember to step outside occasionally, to feel the sun on his face, to speak with his neighbors, to honor the life he still had by actually living it. That same night, while Magnus slept his first truly restful sleep in years, the stones sang again. And this time it was Runa who heard them. Runa was 13, caught in that awkward space between childhood and adulthood, uncertain of who she was becoming. She had 3 older brothers, all of them loud and confident and skilled at things like hunting and fighting, and she often felt invisible in their shadows. Her mother tried to teach her weaving and cooking, the expected skills of a future wife, but Runa's heart wasn't in it. She didn't know what she wanted, only that it wasn't what was expected of her. She had been lying awake in her bed, listening to her family's sleeping breaths around her, when she heard the humming. Unlike Sigrid, who had approached the stones with childish curiosity, and unlike Magnus, who had come to them in desperate exhaustion, Runa approached with something closer to anger. She was tired of being confused, tired of feeling lost, tired of everyone else seeming to know their place in the world while she floundered in uncertainty. The stones didn't care about her anger. They accepted it, absorbed it, and then showed her the dream of a woman named Thyra. Thyra had been a trader, unusual in itself, who had spent her life traveling between settlements, bringing news and goods and stories from distant lands. She had never married, never settled in one place, never followed the path that was expected of women in her time. And at the end, when fever had taken her far from any home she could claim, her final thoughts had been of satisfaction. She had lived the life she wanted. She had seen wonders. She had been true to herself, even when it made others uncomfortable. Runa woke with her fists clenched and her heart pounding. The dream hadn't given her answers about what she should do, but it had given her something more important. Permission to not know yet, permission to wait until she found her own path, permission to disappoint expectations if necessary. She was only 13. She had time to discover who she would become. Over the following weeks, more and more villagers experienced the dreams of the stones. There was Folkvar, the blacksmith's apprentice, who dreamed of a warrior who had died saving his enemy from drowning, learning in the process that compassion was a form of strength. There was Gaida, the herbalist, who dreamed of a healer who had spent her last moments thinking of all the people she'd been unable to save, teaching Gaida to forgive herself for the limitations of her craft. There was young Eric, barely 6, who dreamed of an old man who had died peacefully in his sleep, his last thoughts a simple gratitude for a life well lived. Each dream was different. Each carried its own particular lesson or insight, but they all shared certain qualities. They were all gentle in their way, even the ones that dealt with violent deaths. They were all focused on what had mattered to the dying person in their final moments. And what had mattered was rarely what the person might have expected when they were younger, caught up in ambition and desire in the day-to-day dramas of living. What had mattered again and again were small things. The memory of a parent's love, the feeling of rain on skin during a hot summer, the sound of laughter shared with friends, the sight of sunset over familiar mountains, the warmth of a fire in winter, the taste of bread broken and shared, the simple, ordinary, infinitely precious moments that make up a life. The village began to understand something collectively that would be hard to put into words. They understood that they were living their last moments right now, in the sense that every moment was a last moment, unique and unrepeatable, slipping into the past even as it was experienced. The dreams taught them to pay attention, to be present, to notice the small things that would one day seem enormous when viewed from the end of life. But the dreams also brought challenges. Not everyone who heard the stones found peace in what they experienced. Some came away disturbed, confronted with truths about themselves they'd been avoiding. Some found the experience so intense that they avoided the stones afterward, afraid of what other revelations might be waiting in those ancient vibrations. There was Kiel, for instance, who dreamed of a man who had died full of regrets, his last thoughts a litany of chances not taken, words not spoken, loves not pursued. Kiel woke from that dream shaken, forced to confront his own pattern of hesitation and avoidance. It took him weeks to process what he'd learned, and when he finally did, he made changes to his life that some in the village found baffling. He ended a betrothal that had been arranged but never felt right. He apologized to a brother he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. He began spending his evenings learning to play the lyre, something he'd always wanted to do but had dismissed as frivolous. There was Solveig, who dreamed of a woman who had died in bitterness, her last thoughts consumed by old feuds and perceived slights, unable even at the end to let go of her grievances. Solveig, who had been nursing her own resentments for years, woke from that dream with a terrible clarity about where she was heading if she didn't change course. She didn't become a different person overnight, but she did begin the slow work of letting go, of choosing connection over being right, of prioritizing peace over victory. The dreams were not always comfortable. They were not always what people wanted or expected, but they were always, in their way, exactly what was needed. Eirik watched all of this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because he could see the village transforming, becoming more conscious, more deliberate in how people treated each other and lived their lives. Sorrow because he knew it couldn't last, because the stones would eventually empty themselves, and because he wondered what would happen to the village's newfound wisdom when the nightly reminders stopped coming. He spent many hours by the stones during this period, not always trying to receive dreams himself, but simply keeping them company, bearing witness to their slow unburdening. Sometimes he would run his fingers over the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning, wondering about the people who had first raised these monuments and given them their sacred purpose. On one such evening, as he sat in meditation by the central stone, he became aware of a presence beside him. He opened his eyes to find Sigrid sitting there, her small legs crossed, her hands resting on her knees in unconscious imitation of his own posture. "Why do they share the dreams now?" she asked without preamble. "Why not before? Why not years ago when my grandmother was alive, or centuries ago when they were first made?" Eirik smiled at the directness of the question. Children were good at asking these essential things. "I don't know for certain," he admitted, "but I have a theory. I think perhaps the stones wait until they sense a need, until the dreams they hold might make a difference. There are times in history when people are more open to receiving such gifts, when the walls between worlds grow thin, when transformation is possible in ways it isn't during more settled times. Is this one of those times?" Sigrid asked. "I believe it is. I think our village, perhaps our whole people, are at a turning point. We've been following certain paths without questioning them, living according to patterns set long ago without asking if those patterns still serve us. The dreams are offering us a chance to see differently, to choose differently." Sigrid was quiet for a moment, digesting this. Then she asked, What happens when all the dreams are gone? Eirik had been dreading this question because he didn't have a good answer. Then it will be up to us to remember, he said finally, to hold on to what we've learned and to pass it forward. The stones are giving us their wisdom, but wisdom doesn't help anyone if it's not used, if it's not integrated into how we live. When they fall silent, we must become the keepers of what they've taught us. That's scary, Sigrid said quietly. Yes, Eirik agreed, but also necessary. All gifts eventually become responsibilities. That's part of receiving them with proper respect. They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened and the stars emerged. After a while, the humming began, soft at first but growing stronger, and both Eirik and Sigrid felt themselves being drawn into the dream that was waiting to be shared. This dream belonged to a man named Halvard, who had been a farmer his entire life, working the same piece of land his father and grandfather had worked before him. He had never traveled beyond a day's walk from his home. He had never done anything that would be remembered in songs or stories. But he had lived with attention and care. He had noticed the way morning light fell across his fields in different seasons. He had known each of his animals individually, had learned their personalities and preferences. He had loved his wife with a steady, unglamorous devotion that deepened year by year. He had raised his children to be kind, and when he died, old and worn but content, his last thoughts had been a simple thank you to the world for the privilege of having been alive in it. Both Eirik and Sigrid woke from that dream with tears on their faces, but they were good tears, the kind that come from being touched by something beautiful and true. They looked at each other in the darkness, and no words were necessary. They had just been shown what a well-lived life looked like, and it was simpler and more profound than either of them had imagined. As the weeks turned into months, the patterns of the stones singing became clearer. They didn't sing every night, and they couldn't be predicted. Sometimes days would pass in silence, and then they would sing 3 nights in a row. Sometimes only one person would hear them, sometimes a dozen. There was no controlling it, no way to schedule or manage the experience. You simply had to remain open, remain attentive, and trust that if you needed to hear a particular dream, the stones would find a way to share it with you. This unpredictability became its own kind of teaching. People learned to let go of expectations, to stop trying to force or control their experiences with the stones. They learned that wisdom comes in its own time, that transformation can't be rushed, that some gifts can only be received when you stop grasping for them. The village changed in ways both obvious and subtle. Disputes that might once have escalated were resolved more quickly, with both parties more willing to see the other's perspective. Parents spent more time with their children, actually listening to them rather than simply directing them. Elders were treated with greater respect, their stories and memories valued as the precious resources they were. Even the way people moved through the village seemed different, slower, more present, more aware of the life happening around them. But not everyone changed. Some villagers remained skeptical of the entire phenomenon, dismissing the dreams as collective delusion or tricks of an overactive imagination. Some attended the stones once or twice, experienced nothing or something they found uncomfortable, and never returned. And that was okay too. Eirik reminded people that the stone's wisdom was an offering, not a requirement. Each person had to find their own path to understanding, their own way of growing and learning. There was one man in particular, Jarkey, who actively resisted the stones and their influence. He was a successful trader, wealthy by the village's standards, and he saw the changes happening around him as weakening. All this talk of peace and small moments and letting go, it struck him as soft, as a retreat from the Viking spirit of ambition and conquest that had made their people great. He spoke against the stones in the village council, arguing that they were making the people weak, distracted from practical concerns by mystical nonsense. Some agreed with him, especially among the younger warriors who were eager to prove themselves and feared that the village's new gentleness might be mistaken for weakness by potential enemies. The tension came to a head one evening when Jarkey, emboldened by mead and the support of his allies, decided to confront the stones directly. He gathered a group of like-minded men and marched to where the stones stood, intending to, what exactly? Destroy them? Deface them? Prove that they held no real power? But when they arrived, they found Eirik already there, along with several others who had felt called to the stones that evening. The two groups faced each other in the twilight, neither quite sure what would happen next. "These stones are making fools of you all," Jarkey declared, his voice loud in the quiet evening. "You're neglecting your duties, wasting time on dreams and fantasies, forgetting what it means to be strong." Eirik regarded him calmly. "Is it strength you're worried about, Jarkey? Or is it fear?" "I fear nothing." "Then why do the stones threaten you so much?" Eirik's voice was gentle, without mockery. "They haven't forced anyone to do anything. They've simply offered their wisdom to those willing to receive it. If you don't want their gift, you're free to refuse it. But why try to deny it to others?" Jarkey had no good answer to this. He stood there, fists clenched, angry in a way he couldn't quite articulate even to himself. The truth was he was afraid of what he might see if he opened himself to the stone's dreams, afraid of what truths about himself might be revealed, afraid that everything he'd built his life around, the accumulation of wealth, the respect earned through shrewdness and strength, might be shown to be less important than he'd always believed. Before anyone could speak again, the stones began to hum. It was louder than usual, more insistent, as though they had been waiting for this moment. Everyone present felt the vibration, even Jarkey and his companions who had come intending to oppose the stone's influence. And in that moment, Jarkey made a choice. He could continue to resist, to fight against something he didn't understand, or he could surrender to his fear and see what lay on the other side of it. With a sound that was half growl and half sob, he sank to his knees before the central stone and placed his palms against its warm surface. The dream that came to him was devastating in its simplicity. It was the dream of a wealthy jarl who had died, surrounded by gold and silver and fine things, his hall full of treasures acquired through years of cunning trades and successful raids. But in his final moments, none of it mattered. He thought only of his daughter, who had stopped visiting years ago after a fight he couldn't even remember the details of. He thought of his wife, who had died lonely despite sharing his bed, starved for connection he'd never learned to give. He thought of the life he'd lived and the life he might have lived, and the distance between the two was so vast it felt like falling. When Jarkey woke, his companions were gone, frightened away by his anguished cries during the dream. Only Eirik remained, sitting a respectful distance away, waiting. Jarkey's face was wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "I've been such a fool," he whispered. "No," Eirik said firmly. "You've been human. We're all fools until we learn otherwise, and even then we backslide regularly. The question is what you do with what you've learned." Jarkey nodded slowly. He looked at the stones with new eyes, no longer seeing them as threats, but as the gifts they truly were. "Thank you," he said, though it wasn't clear if he was speaking to Eirik, to the stones, or to the dead Jarl whose dream he'd received. In the days that followed, Jarkey became one of the stone's most regular visitors. He didn't speak much about what he'd experienced, but his actions spoke for him. He began giving away much of his wealth, not in grand gestures, but in quiet acts of generosity. He visited his elderly father, with whom he'd had a strained relationship for years, and simply sat with him, listening to old stories. He started spending his evenings not in calculation and planning, but in the company of others, learning to be present, learning to connect. His transformation didn't convert everyone who had been skeptical, but it did give them pause. If someone as hardened as Jarkey could be moved by the stone's wisdom, perhaps there was something real there after all. But actually, the stones had already begun their final phase, though most in the village didn't realize it yet. The humming was growing softer with each passing night, the intervals between singing longer. Eirik marked the changes carefully, his heart growing heavier as he recognized what they meant. He had hoped for more time, more dreams, more chances for the village to learn and grow. But the stones were emptying themselves according to their own schedule, not his hopes. He called a gathering in the longhouse on a cold evening in late autumn. The entire village came, sensing the importance of what he had to say. Even those who had remained skeptical of the stones attended, curious about what the old skald had to announce. "My friends," Eirik began, his voice carrying the weight of his years, "I have kept count of the dreams as best I could. I have observed the patterns of the stones singing, and I believe we have only a handful of dreams left, perhaps 5, perhaps 10, but no more than that. Soon, possibly within a week or two, the stones will fall silent forever." A murmur ran through the crowd, a mixture of surprise, sadness, and for some, relief. The stones have been a powerful presence in their lives for months now, both blessing and burden, and the thought of their silence brought complicated feelings. "What should we do?" someone called out. Eirik smiled sadly. "We should do what we've been learning to do all along. We should live with attention and care. We should remember what the dreams have taught us. We should honor the wisdom of those who came before by how we choose to live our own lives. And perhaps most importantly, we should prepare ourselves to pass these lessons forward, to teach our children not just the stories of the stones, but the truths the stones revealed." "But how do we remember it all?" asked Runa, the girl who had dreamed of the traitor woman. "There have been so many dreams, so many lessons. How do we make sure we don't forget?" "That," Eirik said, "is why I'm telling you now while there's still time. I propose that we gather each night for the next week, all of us together, and we speak of what we've learned. Each person who has received a dream should share it, should put into words the wisdom they gained. And I will weave these tellings into a saga, a story that can be passed down to future generations, so that even when the stones are silent, their gifts will continue to speak." The village agreed to this plan, and so began a week of extraordinary gatherings. Each night, as the sun set and the air grew cool, People would come to the longhouse, filling it to capacity and beyond. And one by one, they would stand and speak of their dreams. Magnus spoke of Arn and the lesson of selfless action. Runa spoke of Thyra and the permission to forge your own path. Kjell spoke of the regretful man and the importance of not postponing life. Solveig spoke of the bitter woman and the freedom that comes from letting go of grievances. Bjarki spoke, his voice breaking, of the wealthy Jarl and the difference between success and meaning. Dozens more shared their stories, each one different, each one moving in its own way. Sigrid spoke of Thorvald, the first dream she'd received, and how it had changed her understanding of death from an ending to a transformation. Young Eric spoke of the old man's gratitude, and how it had helped him appreciate even small things like the taste of honey or the warmth of his mother's hand. Eirik listened to all of it, his mind working to find the patterns, to weave the individual dreams into a coherent whole. He saw the threads that connected them, the common themes that ran through all the different stories. And slowly, in his mind, the saga began to take shape. On the 5th night of these gatherings, as an elderly woman named Thora was speaking about her dream of a midwife who had died delivering her last baby, the stones began to hum. Everyone in the long house fell silent, listening. The sound was barely audible, a whisper of what it had once been, but it was there. "Should we go to them?" someone asked. "No," Eirik said quietly. "Let them sing their song here, among all of us. Whoever is meant to receive this dream will receive it, whether they're sitting by the stones or sitting here in the warmth." And so they waited, the entire village holding its breath, listening to that faint, fragile humming. It lasted longer than usual, as though the stones were gathering their strength for one more gift. And then, suddenly, the dream came, not to one person or a few, but to everyone present. Young and old, believer and skeptic, everyone in that long house experienced the same vision at the same time. It was the dream of the seer who had first captured these dreams and placed them in the stones. She had been ancient even then, at the end of a long life spent learning the secrets of the liminal spaces, the thin places where the veil between worlds grew transparent. And in her final moments, she had thought about all the dreams she'd gathered over her lifetime, all the final visions of dying warriors she'd preserved in the stones. She had not done it out of duty or obligation, but out of love. Love for her people, yes, but more than that, love for the human experience itself, for the beautiful, tragic, complex reality of being alive and aware and temporary. She wanted future generations to understand that death was not something to be feared or avoided, but something that, properly understood, could teach the living how to live. Her last thought, the final image in her mind before she too became one of the dreams captured in stone, was simple. May they understand. May they learn. May they live well. When the villagers came back to themselves, there was not a dry eye among them. They sat in stunned silence for a long moment, processing what they'd experienced. Then, spontaneously, someone began to sing. It was a simple melody, wordless at first, just a rising and falling of notes that captured something of the emotion they were all feeling. Others joined in, and the song grew, filling the longhouse with sound as rich and complex as the humming of the stones had been. They sang for the seer who had given them this gift, They sang for all the warriors whose dreams had been preserved and shared. They sang for each other and for the people they would become because of what they'd learned. They sang until their voices grew hoarse and the fire burned low and the night deepened toward dawn. And when they finally fell silent and began to make their way home, they all knew without being told that the stones would not sing again. That final dream had been the last. The gift had been given completely. The next day, Eirik began the work of composing the saga. He worked steadily for weeks, weaving together all the stories he'd heard, shaping them into a narrative that would carry the stone's wisdom forward. He called it the Saga of the Dreaming Stones, and when he performed it for the first time in the Longhouse that winter, it took 3 full evenings to tell from beginning to end. The saga became a treasured part of the village's traditions. Eirik taught it to Sigrid, who would eventually teach it to her own students, who would teach it to theirs. Each generation added their own insights, their own interpretations, but the core of it, the dreams and the lessons they contained, remained constant. Years passed. The stones stood silent in their triangle, weathering seasons and storms, becoming so familiar a part of the landscape that eventually people stopped seeing them as anything special. They were just stones, after all, ancient and carved and mysterious in their origins, but stones nonetheless. But those who knew the saga, those who had lived through the time when the stones sang, never forgot what they truly were. They were monuments to the dead, yes, but more than that, they were reminders to the living. Reminders to pay attention, to cherish the small moments, to live with intention and care, to understand that how you spend your days is how you spend your life. Sigrid, as she grew older and eventually became the village's primary skald, added a coda to the saga. She would speak it at the very end, after all the dreams had been recounted and all the lessons shared. And so the stones fell silent, she would say, her voice carrying the same power Eirik's had in his prime, but the dreaming did not end. For every person who heard their songs learned to carry the dreaming forward. We're all stones now in our way. We all hold within us the accumulated wisdom of those who came before, and we all have the responsibility to share that wisdom with those who come after. The dreaming stones taught us that death is not an ending, but a transformation, that wisdom can be preserved and passed forward, that the small moments matter more than the grand gestures, and that a life well lived is not measured by achievements or acquisitions, but by how fully present we were, how deeply we loved, how completely we allowed ourselves to be alive. So when you walk past the silent stones, remember what they were, remember what they taught, and carry that dreaming forward into your own life, so that when your time comes and your own final moments arrive, you too can think back on your days with satisfaction, with gratitude, with peace. May you live well. May you love deeply. May you pay attention. This is the gift of the dreaming stones. And every time she spoke those words, the people listening would sit in contemplative silence for a long moment afterward, each person reflecting on their own life, their own choices, their own dreams, both sleeping and waking. And in that silence, if you listen very carefully, you might imagine you could still hear it. That gentle humming, that ancient song, that reminder that life is precious and brief and infinitely worth experiencing with full awareness and open heart. The stones stood in their triangle at the edge of the village, silent but not empty, monuments to a gift that had been given and received with grace. And the village that grew up around them was different because of their presence, shaped by their wisdom even in their silence. For the dreaming stones had taught the living to dream while awake, to remain conscious and present, to understand that every moment contains the potential for transformation, that every breath is an opportunity to choose awareness over automaticity, presence over distraction, connection over isolation. This was their final gift, and it was the greatest gift of all. Not just the dreams themselves, but the understanding that life itself is a dream worth paying attention to, worth experiencing fully, worth honoring with all the consciousness we can bring to bear. And so the story ends where it began, with the understanding that sleep and waking are not opposites, but partners in the dance of being human. The stones gave their dreams to help the living learn to live. And in the learning, the living discovered that they too were dreamers, that they too held wisdom worth preserving, that they too would one day become the teachers for those who came after. The saga was passed down through generations. Long after the last person who had actually heard the stones sing had died, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren still told the story. The village changed, grew, eventually became something more than a village, but the story remained, adapted and updated, but faithful to its essential truths. And sometimes, on particularly clear nights when the stars blazed overhead and the air held that special quality of stillness that seems to exist outside of time, people would walk to where the stones stood. They would place their hands on the ancient surface, still looking for warmth that was no longer there, still hoping for humming that had long since faded into silence. But occasionally, very occasionally, in moments of particular need or particular readiness, someone would report that they had felt something. Not the humming exactly, but an echo of it. A vibration so faint it might have been imagination, might have been the beating of their own heart amplified by attention and hope. And whether it was real or imagined didn't matter. The stones had already given their gift. The dreams had already been shared. The lessons had already been learned and passed forward. What remained was not magic but memory, not power but presence, not certainty but faith that the wisdom of those who came before continues to speak to us if we're willing to listen. This is what Sigrid understood in her old age, sitting by the stones on one of her last nights. She had outlived most of her generation, had seen the village transform multiple times, had taught the saga to dozens of students who would carry it forward after she was gone. And she knew, with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end of life, that the stones had accomplished exactly what they were meant to accomplish. They had cracked open the hard shell of ordinary consciousness and let a little light in. They had reminded people of what mattered. They had given the dying a voice and the living ears to hear them. And in doing so, they had planted seeds of awareness that would continue to grow and bloom long after the stones themselves had crumbled to dust. She leaned her back against the central stone one final time, feeling its solid presence, its patient endurance. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, deeply, letting herself sink into the peaceful state that the stones had first taught her all those years ago when she was 7 and sleepless and willing to follow a strange sound into the night. And in that peace, in that deep quietude of mind and heart, she heard it again, or thought she heard it, which amounted to the same thing. That gentle humming, that ancient song, that reminder that all of life is a dreaming and all of us are dreamers, stumbling through our days half awake until something, a stone, a story, a shock, a silence, jolts us into presence and shows us what was always there waiting to be seen. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. The village slept and woke and slept again. Seasons turned, years passed, and the stones stood silent through all of it, keeping their vigil, holding their space, remaining present even in their emptiness as monuments to the truth that wisdom is not lost when the wise die, that love is not lost when the lover dies, that the essence of what it means to be human, to be conscious and temporary and capable of both suffering and joy, continues through the generations, carried forward by those willing to receive it and pass it on. This is the saga of the dreaming stones. This is the story of how death taught life its lessons. This is the account of a village transformed by the simple act of listening. May you, too, learn to listen. May you, too, carry the dreaming forward. May you, too, live with the awareness that your days are precious and brief and infinitely worth experiencing with full presence. The stones are silent now, but their song continues in every heart that heard them, in every life they touched, in every moment when someone chooses awareness over automaticity, presence over distraction, connection over isolation. The dreaming continues. It always has. It always will. You need only stop and listen to hear it. But there are more stories to tell before we let sleep take us completely. Let us linger a while longer in those nights when the stones still sang, when their burden was still heavy with the dreams of the distant dead. There was a woman named Astrid, not the elderly woman who had recognized her brother Thorvald in Sigurd's first dream, but a younger Astrid, a mother of 3 who had lost her youngest child to winter fever 2 years past. She had survived the loss, had continued caring for her other children and her husband, had gone through all the motions of living, but something in her had remained frozen, locked away in the moment when she'd held her daughter's cooling body and felt the terrible finality of death. She avoided the stones deliberately. She had heard the stories, had seen how others were affected by the dreams, and she didn't want any part of it. Death had taken enough from her. She wasn't interested in receiving its wisdom or its lessons. She wanted nothing more than to forget, to somehow push past the grief and return to who she'd been before loss had carved this hollow space in her chest. But the stones, it seemed, had other plans. It happened on a night when sleep eluded her completely. Her husband and remaining children were lost in peaceful slumber, their breathing creating a gentle rhythm that only emphasized her own restless wakefulness. She lay there for hours, staring at the darkness, until finally she gave up on sleep and rose to walk through the night air, hoping physical movement might tire her enough to rest. Without consciously deciding to go there, she found her feet taking her toward the edge of the village, toward the stones. She told herself she would just walk past them, that proximity didn't mean participation. But as she drew near, the humming began, and it was different this time, more insistent, more personal, as though the stones were calling to her specifically. She stopped walking. Her first instinct was to turn and run, to flee back to her house and barricade herself against whatever truth the stones might reveal. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a terrible, desperate hunger for understanding. She was so tired of carrying her grief alone, so tired of pretending to be fine when she wasn't, so tired of the hollow space inside her that nothing could fill. With a sound that was half sob, half surrender, Astrid approached the stones and laid her hands on the central one. The warmth that emanated from it was shocking, like touching living skin instead of ancient rock. The humming grew louder, filling her ears, her head, her entire body, until she couldn't tell where the vibration ended and she began. The dream that came was the dream of a woman named Brynhild, who had been a mother of 5. Brynhild had outlived 4 of her children, each death a separate agony, each loss a wound that never fully healed. By the time she herself died, peacefully in old age, surrounded by her surviving daughter and her grandchildren, she had spent decades carrying her grief like a heavy cloak she could never quite remove. But in her final moments, Brynhild's perspective shifted. She saw her lost children not as absences, but as presences, not as voids, but as the love she'd given them and they'd given her, a love that didn't end just because their physical forms had ceased. She understood, in that moment of transition, that grief was love with nowhere to go, and that the way to honor her dead children was not to remain frozen in the moment of their deaths, but to let the love she felt for them flow forward, warming everything she touched, everyone she encountered. Her last thought was this: they are in me. They have always been in me. In every kindness I've shown, every comfort I've given, every time I've chosen gentleness over hardness, they are there. Death has changed the form, but not the fact of my love for them. When Astrid woke from the dream, she was sobbing, great, wrenching sobs that came from someplace so deep she hadn't known it existed. She cried for her lost daughter, yes, but also for herself, for the 2 years she'd spent frozen and half alive. She cried for Brynhild and the losses that woman had endured. She cried for every parent who had ever lost a child, for every heart that had ever broken from love meeting loss. And when the crying finally subsided, when she could breathe again, she felt something shift inside her. The hollow space was still there. It would always be there, she understood now, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the love she still felt for her daughter, a love that death couldn't touch or diminish. Her daughter was gone, yes, but the love remained, active and alive, looking for ways to express itself. Astrid walked home as dawn broke, and when she entered her house and saw her 2 living children beginning to stir, she felt her heart crack open in a way it hadn't in 2 years. She went to each of them, gathered them in her arms, and held them close, feeling their warmth, their aliveness, their precious, temporary presence. And in that holding, her lost daughter was there too, in the fierceness of Astrid's love, in her gratitude for the children she still had, in her determination to be fully present for the days they had together. Later that day, she sought out another mother in the village who had recently lost a child. She didn't say much, just sat with the woman, held her hand, and let her cry. And in that simple act of witness and compassion, Astrid felt her daughter's presence so strongly, it was almost like she was there in the room with them, smiling, approving, saying, yes, this is how you carry me forward. This is how you keep me alive. The days that followed were not easy. Grief doesn't resolve itself in a single night, even a night as profound as the one Astrid had experienced. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer frozen. She was no longer half alive. She was moving through her grief instead of being stuck in it. And that movement, however slow and painful, was a kind of healing. There was a young man named Tormod who heard the stones on the night after Astrid's dream. Tormod was 19, strong and skilled with weapons, eager to prove himself in battle and earn glory like the warriors in the old stories. He had been chafing at the peace that had settled over the village since the stones began singing, seeing it as a kind of weakness that his generation needed to overcome. The dream he received was the dream of Bjorn the Berserker, a warrior who had been famous in his time for his battle rage and his fearlessness. Bjorn had fought in more battles than he could count, had killed more men than he could remember, had earned wealth and fame and the respect of jarls and kings. And in his final moments, dying from wounds received in what proved to be his last fight, he had thought, what was it all for? Not in the sense of philosophical despair, but in genuine curiosity. He had spent his entire adult life pursuing glory, and he had achieved it. He was a man who would be remembered in songs and stories. And yet, lying there with his life bleeding out onto foreign soil, he couldn't quite recall what had driven him. The thrill of battle, which had once seemed like the highest form of living, felt hollow in retrospect. The respect of other warriors, which had once meant everything, seemed suddenly arbitrary. What he found himself thinking about instead were the quiet moments. A morning 20 years past when he'd sat by a stream and watched the sun rise. An evening in a tavern when he'd laughed so hard with his companions that his sides ached. A brief love affair with a woman whose name he'd forgotten, but whose gentleness he remembered with startling clarity. These were the moments that felt real now, that felt like they'd actually mattered. His last thought was a warning to anyone who might hear it. Don't mistake the loudest life for the richest one. Don't confuse achievement with meaning. Pay attention to the quiet moments. They're the ones that last. Tormod woke from this dream shaken. He had been so certain of what he wanted, so clear about his path. But Bjorn's final thoughts had planted a seed of doubt, and that seed grew quickly in the fertile soil of Tormod's young mind. He spent days wrestling with what he'd learned, arguing with himself, trying to reconcile the glorious image of the berserker he'd always admired with the hollow feeling that had emanated from Bjorn's dying thoughts. Finally, he sought out Eirik for guidance. The old skald listened to Tormod's confusion with the patience of someone who had seen this struggle many times before. The stones aren't telling you not to fight, Eirik said gently. They're telling you to understand why you fight, what you're fighting for, and what you're willing to sacrifice in pursuit of it. Some battles need to be fought. Some causes are worth dying for. But if you spend your whole life chasing glory without ever stopping to ask what you're glorifying, you may find at the end that you've missed the actual life you could have lived. So what should I do? Tormod asked, genuinely lost. Live deliberately. Make conscious choices instead of following paths laid out by others' expectations. Train with your weapons. Yes, we still need defenders, and skill is worth having. But also train yourself to pay attention, to notice beauty, to build connections, to create meaning beyond what others will say about you after you're gone. Be a warrior if that's your calling, but be a whole person first. This conversation became a turning point for Tormod. He didn't give up his weapons or his training, but he approached them differently now. He fought and practiced bouts not to prove something, but to hone a skill he might one day need. He spent his evenings not in boasting, but in genuine friendship. And years later, when he did eventually fight in a real battle defending the village from raiders, he did so without the berserker rage of legend, but with a clear-eyed understanding of what he was protecting and why it mattered. There were twin sisters, Inga and Solvi, who received their dreams on the same night. They were 15, mirror images of each other in appearance, but increasingly different in temperament. Inga was cautious and thoughtful, always planning ahead, always worried about consequences. Solvi was impulsive and passionate, diving into experiences without hesitation, letting her heart lead in all things. They have been arguing more frequently lately, each sister frustrated by the other's approach to life. Inga thought Solvi was reckless. Solvi thought Inga was timid. And beneath the specific disagreements was a deeper fear in each of them that maybe they were doing life wrong, that maybe their sister's way was better. The dreams they received seemed almost designed to address this split. Inga dreamed of a woman named Gunvor who had lived her entire life in careful moderation, always taking the safe path, never risking failure or embarrassment. She had avoided pain, yes, but she had also avoided passion, adventure, deep connection. And at the end, her regret was almost palpable, not for what she'd done, but for what she'd never allowed herself to do. Solvi, meanwhile, dreamed of a man named Skeggi who had lived entirely in the moment, pursuing every desire, following every impulse. He had experienced intense joys and equally intense sorrows. He had loved deeply and lost devastatingly. He had lived a full life in terms of experience, but he had also left wreckage in his wake. Broken promises, damaged relationships, consequences he'd never stuck around to face. His dying regret was different from Gunvor's, but equally sharp. I wish I had paused sometimes. I wish I had thought before acting. I wish I had considered not just what I wanted, but what was needed. When the sisters woke and shared their dreams with each other, they fell silent, each processing what they'd learned. Then, almost simultaneously, they began to laugh. Not mockery, but recognition. The stones had shown them both the dangers of their respective extremes, had illustrated what happened when caution or passion ran unchecked. I think, Inga said slowly, we need each other. I need you to remind me to take risks, to feel things fully, to say yes sometimes even when I'm scared. And maybe you need me to remind you to pause, to think ahead, to consider consequences. Solvi nodded, her eyes bright. Balance, she said, not choosing one approach over the other, but learning from both. Being thoughtful and passionate, careful and brave. The twins' relationship transformed after that night. Instead of each trying to prove their approach superior, they began to see themselves as complements, two halves of a whole, each offering what the other lacked. They learned to consult each other before major decisions. Inga asking, what does your heart say? And Solvi asking, what does your head say? And in the space between those two questions, they usually found the wisest course. As winter deepened and the stones humming grew fainter, the village developed a kind of ritual around the dreams. Whenever someone received one, they would share it at the next evening's gathering, and Eirik would help interpret it, would find the threads that connected it to other dreams, would weave it into the growing tapestry of understanding that would eventually become the Saga. There was Oarum, who dreamed of a fisherman who had died at sea, his last thoughts a profound appreciation for the ocean that had both fed him and killed him. ORM woke understanding that life and death were not opposites, but partners, that the forces that sustain us can also destroy us, and that gratitude is possible even, especially, in the face of that paradox. There was little Hilda, only 9 years old, who dreamed of an ancient woman who had spent her last moments trying to remember the names of everyone she'd ever loved. Some names came easily. Others were frustratingly just out of reach. But the effort itself, the attention she gave to remembering, was an act of love. Hilda learned that people continue to exist as long as they're remembered, that memory is a form of resurrection, and that the simple act of thinking about someone with love is a gift both to them and to yourself. There was Steiner, the village's best hunter, who dreamed of a man who had died of starvation, ironically in a land of plenty, because he'd been too proud to ask for help. Steiner, who had always prided himself on his self-sufficiency, learned that independence pushed to its extreme becomes isolation, and that there's strength in acknowledging need, in accepting assistance, in being part of a community where people care for each other. Each dream was its own teaching, but together they formed a curriculum in how to be human, how to live with awareness, how to love without grasping, how to strive without losing yourself, how to grieve without becoming grief, how to enjoy without becoming enslaved to pleasure, how to work without becoming work, how to die without becoming death. The stones were teaching the village how to hold paradox, how to embrace seeming contradictions, how to live in the tension between opposing truths without needing to resolve that tension into simple answers. Life is precious and life is temporary. We should plan for the future and live in the present. We need both caution and courage. We're individuals and we're part of communities. Death is loss and death is transformation. As the final dreams approached, the humming of the stones took on a quality that some described as urgency, others as tenderness, still others as longing. It was as though the stones themselves were aware that their task was nearly complete, that soon they would be empty, and they wanted to give everything they had while there was still time. The second to last dream was received by a man who had been born elsewhere, but had married into the village and always felt slightly apart from it, never quite belonging. The dream was of a wanderer who had spent his life moving from place to place, never settling, always seeking something he couldn't name. And in his dying moments, the wanderer realized that what he'd been seeking wasn't a place at all. It was a sense of being at home in himself, of accepting his own nature instead of always feeling like he should be something or somewhere else. The man woke from this dream with tears streaming down his face, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. He understood that he had been waiting for permission to belong, waiting for someone to tell him he was good enough, when all along the permission could only come from himself. In the days that followed, he began participating more fully in village life, not as an outsider trying to fit in, but as someone who had chosen to be there, who claimed his place without apology or defense. And then came the final dream, the one that Sigrid and Eirik and so many others received together in the Longhouse. The dream of the seer who had created the stone's sacred purpose, whose love for humanity had motivated her to preserve these final visions and offer them to the future. But there was one more piece to that dream that not everyone caught, a detail that only the most attentive noticed. In her final moments, the seer had also thought about the limitations of her gift. She knew that the dreams and the stones could only teach so much, that real wisdom required not just receiving insights, but living them, testing them, making mistakes, trying again. She knew that her gift would eventually run out, that the stones would fall silent, and that this silence was necessary. Necessary because at some point, the living have to stop learning from the dead and start learning from life itself. Her penultimate thought was this: I give you these dreams not to tell you how to live, but to wake you up enough that you can figure it out for yourselves. The dead can point the way, but only the living can walk the path. This understanding spread through the village slowly, like dawn light filling a room. The stones had never been meant to be permanent teachers. They were meant to be a catalyst, a shock to consciousness, a gift that would shake people awake and then trust them to stay awake on their own. When the stones fell silent after that final collective dream, there was sadness, yes, but also a sense of completion, of rightness. The gift had been given fully. The burden had been released completely. And now it was up to the living to carry the wisdom forward, not as rules or prescriptions, but as a quality of attention, a way of being in the world. Eirik spent the winter after the last dream crafting the saga, and in the spring, he performed it for the first time. It took 3 evenings as mentioned before, but what hasn't been told yet is what happened on those evenings. The longhouse was packed each night, so full that people stood in the doorway and sat in windows. Everyone wanted to hear the complete story, the full account of what the stones had taught them. Eirik's voice, which had been wavering in recent months as age caught up with him, grew strong and clear as he told the saga. It was as though the stones themselves were speaking through him, giving him their energy for this final act of transmission. He told every dream he could remember, sketched every lesson he'd understood, and wove it all together into a narrative that was both beautiful and true. When he finished on the 3rd evening, when the last words had been spoken and the last lesson delivered, the longhouse remained silent for a long moment. Then Sigrid, who had been sitting at Eirik's feet throughout the entire performance, stood and began to applaud. The rest of the village joined her, clapping and stomping and cheering, and Eirik, who had remained standing throughout the performance despite his age, finally allowed himself to sit. He was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He had poured everything he had into the saga, all his skill, all his understanding, all his love for the village and for the stones and for the human capacity to learn and grow. He had given his gift as fully as the stones had given theirs, and now, like the stones, he felt empty. But it was a good emptiness, a satisfied emptiness. He had done what he was meant to do. He had served his purpose. Whatever time remained to him now was extra, unearned grace, and he would use it as the stones had taught, with attention, with gratitude, with full awareness of its preciousness and impermanence. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn. The village continued to change, continued to integrate what it had learned. Arguments still happened, but they were resolved more quickly and with more compassion. Work still needed doing, but people approached it with better understanding of why they worked and what they were working for. Children were still raised, but with more awareness of how short childhood is, how quickly those small bodies grow and change and become independent beings. The stones stood in their triangle, silent witnesses to the ongoing life of the village. Birds perched on them. Snow accumulated on their tops in winter and melted in spring. Moss grew in their carvings, and lichens created slow, colorful maps across their surfaces. They were becoming part of the landscape, aging as all things age, wearing away atom by atom, year by year, returning to the earth from which they had been hewn. But their influence remained. Children growing up after the stones fell silent still learned the saga. They still understood, even if less viscerally than those who had experienced the dreams directly, that life is precious, that death is a teacher, that paying attention matters, that small moments count, that love is what endures. And sometimes, on nights when sleep wouldn't come, people would still walk to the stones. They would place their hands on the warm, cool surface and close their eyes and listen. Not for humming, they knew that was gone, but for their own inner voice, their own wisdom, their own capacity to dream while waking. Because that ultimately was what the stones had taught, that everyone carries dreams within them, that everyone has access to wisdom if they're willing to stop and listen, that the boundary between living and dead is more permeable than we usually acknowledge, and that the best way to honor those who came before is not to worship them or try to preserve their world unchanged, but to learn from their experiences and then create something new. Sigrid, in her old age, would sometimes be found sitting by the stones in the early morning or late evening, when the light was soft and the world was quiet. People who saw her there respected her solitude, understanding that she was in conversation with something, maybe the stones, maybe her memories, maybe her own soon-approaching death. And in fact, she was in conversation with all of those things. She was thinking about Eirik, who had died peacefully in his sleep 3 winters past, his last words a simple thank you to no one in particular and everyone in general. She was thinking about Sigrid the child, that 7-year-old who had first heard the stones and whose life had been utterly shaped by that hearing. She was thinking about all the people who had received dreams, whose lives had been changed, who had passed those changes forward to their children. And she was thinking about her own death, which she could feel approaching not with fear, but with curiosity. She wondered what her last thoughts would be, what lesson her dying mind would distill from her long life. She hoped it would be something simple and true, something that would help whoever might someday hear it. She hoped she would think about the stones, about that first humming, about the gift she'd been given and had tried her best to pass forward. She hoped she would think about the people she'd loved, the students she'd taught, the stories she'd told and retold. She hoped she would feel satisfied with her choices, grateful for her days, at peace with the approaching transition. But she also knew that you couldn't choose or control your final thoughts any more than you could choose or control your first ones. Death, like life, unfolded according to its own wisdom, and the best you could do was meet it with openness and attention. The sun was setting as she sat there, painting the sky in colors that had no names, only feelings. The stones cast long shadows across the ground, reaching toward her like dark fingers. Somewhere in the village, someone was singing, a mother to her child, perhaps, or lovers to each other, or someone simply for the joy of making sound. Sigrid listened to that distant singing and smiled. This, she thought, this is what matters. This moment, this sunset, this song, this stone beneath my hand, this breath in my lungs, this life I've been given and am still for now living. The stones had taught her that, had taught all of them that. How to be present, how to notice, how to let each moment be what it was without rushing toward the next one or lingering too long in the last one. How to live in the eternal now that is the only time we actually inhabit. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Sigrid rose slowly, her old joints protesting, and made her way back to the village. Behind her, the stones stood as they always had and always would, until time and weather finally wore them away to nothing. But even then, their legacy would remain in the saga, in the changed lives and the quality of attention the village brought to its days. The dreaming stones had dreamed their dreams, and in receiving those dreams, the village had learned to dream its own. Not sleeping dreams, but waking ones, dreams of how life could be lived, how communities could function, how individuals could grow, how death could teach life, how the past could serve the present without imprisoning it. This is the gift that continues. This is the song that still sounds. This is the humming that never truly stops for those who know how to listen. Not with their ears, but with their whole being, not for external sound, but for internal resonance. Not for answers, but for questions that lead to better questions that lead eventually, if you're lucky, to the kind of silence that contains everything. Sleep comes eventually, to every person, every story, every stone. But before sleep, there's this moment of awareness, this breath, this heartbeat, this precious, temporary, infinitely valuable experience of being alive and conscious and capable of noticing that you are alive and conscious. Pay attention. This is the lesson. This is the wisdom. This is the dream that the stones spent centuries gathering and months releasing, and that now lives in you, if you're willing to receive it. Pay attention. The stars are wheeling overhead. The earth is turning beneath you. Your heart is beating its steady rhythm. Your breath is flowing in and out. You are alive right now, in this moment, and that aliveness is the greatest gift you'll ever receive. How will you use it? How will you honor it? How will you pass it forward? These are the questions the stones asked. These are the questions each generation must answer for itself. These are the questions that have no final answers but infinite responses, each one valid, each one unique, each one a small dream added to the great dreaming that is human consciousness moving through time. May you sleep well when sleep comes. May you wake well when waking comes. And may you live well in all the moments between, carrying the wisdom of the dreaming stones forward into whatever future you're creating with every choice, every breath, every moment of attention you bring to the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of being alive. This is the saga. This is the teaching. This is the gift. Receive it with gratitude. Live it with awareness. Pass it forward with love. And rest now, knowing that the dreaming continues, always, forever, in every heart that remains open to its call. There's one final story to tell before we close our eyes and let sleep come fully. It is the story of what happened many years after the stones fell silent, when the last person who had actually heard them sing, a woman named Liv, who had been a small child during that extraordinary time, lay on her deathbed. Liv was 93, ancient by the standards of her time and place. She had lived a full life, had married and raised children, had seen grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She had helped Sigrid teach the saga to younger generations, and in her own quiet way, she had embodied the lessons of the stones more fully than perhaps anyone except Sigrid herself. Now, as her family gathered around her bed, knowing the end was near, Liv did something unexpected. She asked them to carry her to the stones. It was winter, and the journey would be difficult, potentially even deadly in her weakened state. Her children protested, but Liv was insistent, and finally they relented, wrapping her in furs and placing her in a wooden chair that they carried through the snow-covered village to where the stones stood. The stones looked different now than they had in Liv's childhood. Centuries of weather had softened their edges, worn down some of their carvings. Moss and lichen covered much of their surface. They were clearly ancient, clearly sacred in some way, but silent, as they had been for most of Liv's long life. Her family set her chair down before the central stone, and Liv reached out with a trembling hand to touch its surface. It was cold now, winter cold, nothing like the warmth she remembered from her childhood. But as her palm made contact with the stone, as her aged fingers traced the barely visible carvings, something extraordinary happened. The stones began to hum. It was faint, so faint that at first only Liv herself could hear it. But gradually, as she kept her hand pressed against the stone, as she closed her eyes and let herself sink into that familiar vibration, the sound grew stronger. Her family heard it then. They looked at each other in wonder and fear, having heard the saga all their lives, but never truly believing it could be real, not deep in their hearts. But the stones were singing. The stones that had been silent for 80 years were singing again. And Liv was receiving a dream. But this dream was different from all the others that had come from the stones. This wasn't the last thoughts of a dying warrior captured by an ancient seer. This was something else, something unprecedented. This was her own dream, her own life, her own memories, her own accumulated wisdom, being reflected back to her by the stones as though they were showing her what her final thoughts would be, should be, could be if she chose them consciously rather than letting them arise unbidden. She saw herself as a child, hearing the stones for the first time, experiencing that mixture of fear and wonder. She saw herself as a young woman, applying the lessons she'd learned, making choices guided by the wisdom the stones had shared. She saw herself as a mother, teaching her children not just to survive, but to pay attention, to notice, to live with awareness. She saw herself as an elder, passing forward the saga, keeping the wisdom alive for another generation. And she saw the thread that connected all these moments, the simple practice of attention, of presence, of choosing awareness over automaticity. This had been her life's work, though she'd never thought of it in such grand terms. She had simply lived as the stones had taught her to live, and in doing so, she had created a life of meaning and depth and connection. Her last thoughts, or rather, the thoughts she could have chosen as her last thoughts, were these: I was here. I paid attention. I loved fully. I lived deliberately. And I passed this wisdom forward, trusting that each generation will adapt it, will make it their own, will find new ways to embody the essential truth that consciousness is precious and life is brief and attention is the highest form of prayer. When Liv opened her eyes, she was crying and smiling simultaneously. Her family stared at her, seeing something in her face they'd never seen before, a kind of radiance, a peace so complete it seemed to emanate from her like light. "Did you hear it?" she asked them. "Did you hear the stones?" They nodded, too moved to speak. "They sang because I needed them to," Liv said quietly. "Because I was ready to hear not their wisdom, but my own. They held up a mirror and showed me that I had become what they taught me to become. And now it's your turn. Your turn to carry it forward. Your turn to add your own wisdom to the great dreaming." She closed her eyes then, leaning back in the chair, her hands still resting on the stone. The humming grew softer, fading gradually, returning to the silence from which it had emerged. And Liv's breathing grew slower, deeper, more spaced out, until finally it stopped altogether and she passed peacefully into whatever lay beyond. Her family sat with her body for a long time in the cold winter air, not speaking, just being present with death the way the stones had taught the living to be present with life. And when they finally carried her back to the village for the burial rites, they all agreed that they had witnessed something miraculous. Not just Liv's peaceful death, but the confirmation that the stone's wisdom was real, was powerful, was still active even in their silence. The story of Liv's final moments spread through the village and beyond, becoming part of the saga, another layer of meaning added to the already rich tapestry. And it changed how people understood the stones. They weren't just monuments to the past. They were living presences capable of responding to genuine need, capable of teaching in new ways when the time was right. Over the generations that followed, others occasionally reported hearing the stones hum, always at significant moments, always when someone was ready to receive what the stones had to offer. A young person struggling with a major life decision would sit by the stones and hear, in their humming, their own inner wisdom clarified. An elder preparing for death would visit the stones and receive the gift of seeing their life whole, of understanding the pattern and purpose that had run through all their days. The stones became not teachers in the traditional sense, but catalysts for self-knowledge, mirrors that reflected back each person's own accumulated wisdom. They had given their burden of captured dreams, yes, but in doing so, they had awakened something in the living, a capacity to dream while waking, to access their own deep knowing, to trust the wisdom that each person carries within them. This, perhaps, was the stone's greatest gift. Not the specific dreams they had shared, but the awakening of each person's ability to recognize and honor their own dreams, their own wisdom, their own capacity for transformation and growth. The saga continued to be told, growing richer with each generation, each telling adding new insights while remaining faithful to the core truths. Parents told it to children. Elders told it to gatherings. Travelers carried it to other settlements, and it spread slowly, becoming known throughout the northern lands. And wherever the saga went, it carried with it the essential teaching. That life is precious, that attention is sacred, that death has wisdom to offer the living, that the small moments matter most, that love transcends loss, that consciousness is a gift to be honored by how fully we inhabit each moment. The stones stand still today, or so the saga says in its final verses. They stand in their ancient triangle, weathered by centuries, worn by wind and rain and snow, covered in moss and lichen and the patient work of time. They are silent more often than they sing, and when they do sing, It's so quietly that only those who truly need to hear them can perceive their song. But their teaching continues. It lives in every person who chooses awareness over sleepwalking, presence over distraction, connection over isolation. It lives in every parent who teaches their children to notice beauty, to feel gratitude, to pay attention. It lives in every elder who shares their wisdom, every artist who creates with consciousness, every person who pauses in their busy day to simply breathe and notice that they're alive. The dreaming stones dreamed their dreams and then taught the living to dream their own. This is the gift that never stops giving, the wisdom that never stops teaching, the song that never truly falls silent as long as there are hearts willing to listen. So listen now, in this moment, to the sound of your own breath, the beating of your own heart, the presence of your own awareness. You are alive. You are conscious. You are participating in the great dreaming that is existence itself. And how you choose to live this moment and the next moment and all the moments you're given is your contribution to the ongoing saga of what it means to be human. May you live with attention. May you love with fullness. May you die with peace. May you pass forward the wisdom you gain. And may you always remember that you are both the dreamer and the dream, both the story and the teller, both the student and the teacher of your own life. The stones are waiting, not for you to come to them, though you can if you wish, but for you to understand what they have always been pointing toward. The truth that every moment is sacred, every breath is precious, every heartbeat is a gift, and the greatest wisdom is simply to notice, to be present, to pay attention to the extraordinary miracle of being alive. This is the saga of the dreaming stones. This is the teaching they died to share. This is the gift they gave, and that we, the living, continue to receive and pass forward generation after generation, heartbeat after heartbeat, breath after breath, dream after dream. Sleep well, wake well, live well, and when your time comes to add your own final thoughts to the great dreaming, may you do so with the peace and satisfaction of someone who is truly here, who truly lived, who truly loved, who truly paid attention. The stones will remember. The stones always remember. And in their remembering, they keep alive the truth that every life matters, every moment counts, and consciousness itself is the greatest gift we'll ever receive. Rest now. The dreaming continues. It always has. It always will. And you are part of it, now and forever, in ways both known and unknown, in this life and whatever lies beyond. The humming fades. The night deepens. The stars wheel overhead. And somewhere, always somewhere, the stones are singing to someone who needs to hear them, teaching again the lessons that never grow old. Be here. Pay attention. Love fully. Live deliberately. Pass it forward. This is enough. This has always been enough. This will always be enough. The saga ends. Sleep comes. And in the morning, life continues, changed by the wisdom of the dreaming stones, carrying their gift forward into whatever future we create with every choice we make, every moment we inhabit, every breath we take. May you dream well, both sleeping and waking. May you carry the wisdom forward. May you honor the gift of your life by actually living it. This is the end of the saga. This is the beginning of your own story. May the stones guide you. May the dreams inform you. May the wisdom sustain you. And may you always remember that you are both mortal and eternal, temporary and timeless, a single note in the endless song of human consciousness moving through time. Sleep now. The stones are silent, but their song continues in your heart. Rest well, live well, dream well, and pass it forward, always forward, into the ever-unfolding mystery of what it means to be alive. In the beginning, always both, forever.